Welcome everyone to Lunch and Learn. I've worked really hard to put together an awesome presentation. It's easy for me to say it's awesome, right? I'm biased. But my goal is to help you think about some of the new updates in Parkinson's disease and how that compares to what we do in other forms of neurodegenerative disease. So I've entitled this particular lecture, Insights and Updates. I attended a continuing education seminar in Boulder, Colorado, and one of the lecturers' name was Lori Mishley. And Lori Mishley, man, she is remarkable. She is like the Dr. Bredesen of Parkinson's disease. I'll tell you a little bit about what she does. She runs a clinic called the Seattle Integrative Medicine Clinic, and she runs an online school called parkinsonschool.com. She runs a summer camp every year. And if I had known about her summer camp this year, I would have gone. But her summer camp starts next week and we have boot camp, so I won't be able to attend it. She trains dogs to smell Parkinson's disease. When someone cleans out their ears, you could send in a Q-tip to her clinic and her dogs can sniff out Parkinson's far before any motor symptoms show up. She's trying to get some money to really validate that, but she showed videos of that. It's remarkable what she has done. She's developed an app called the Parkinson's Symptom Tracking app. She's done research at the University of Washington and Bastyr University, and she's gotten funding from the Michael J. Fox Foundation and several other small foundations. So she is impressive. She knows her stuff about Parkinson's, and I want to share some of the updates and insights that she shared with us at Continuing Ed. To start off our discussion today, I want to give you a comparison of scurvy. Now, she gave this. This is not original. This is not me saying this. This is how she began her presentation, and it made so much sense to me. It was a 19th century illness that was characterized by all these really terrible and awful symptoms, right? Skin sores, rashes, wounds, broken bones, weakness, chronic fatigue, dental decay, internal bleeding, just an awful disease. And there's an estimate that as many as 50% of sailors that do long around the world.
You're breaking up and you're fading out, Randy.
You know, I'm going to pause. All right, can you hear me? Am I back?
Yes.
Okay, I should have good reception the whole way through, so sorry about that. There was a general perspective that if you had fresh fruit, you didn't struggle with scurvy. And no one knew why, and no one could actually prove it. But there was a lot of discussion about what would make the lives of these sailors better. And in 1953, there was a French mariner named Jacques Cartier who reported that on his particular ship, when the seafarers drank this Native American tea, they did not struggle with scurvy either. So there was a lot of debate. What makes this better? Why does it make it better? No one really knew, but they could manage the symptoms of it. Well, as time progressed, there continued to be this growing consensus about what helped the symptoms or what they perceived made the symptoms better. And the disease was very poorly understood, but many began to treat, if you will, treat in quotes, these symptoms, and they pretty well eradicated the disease before they fully understood it. Okay, so now I want you to be thinking about that in the context of Alzheimer's and dementia. We've spent billions of dollars researching what's driving this. And we're no closer today than we were, I don't know, however long ago. Maybe some would argue we are closer. I don't think we're that much closer to figuring it out. But like scurvy, we know that there are interventions that make people's lives better. So we should stop arguing about the cause and actually just start following populations of people and seeing how we can optimize their health. That's a really powerful lesson. Limes cured scurvy, for 200 years and no one had any idea why. So this lecturer, Lori Mishley, talked about this concept of positive deviance. This is a method of doing research where you look at a population of people who all have a particular challenge. And then you start saying the people that have this problem, some are doing terrible, but some are actually doing really well. So you try to figure out the people that are doing well, what is driving that? What is the positive deviant that makes them do better, even though they have the same diagnosis? The research in positive deviance became really popular in, I think this was about the 60s, I think it was after or during the Vietnam War. Save the Children was a foundation that looked at starving children in many very poor communities in Asia. And they saw these kids were starving, but there were very poor families where some of the kids looked healthy and very robust. And they would live right next door to someone who seemingly had the same challenge, but they were starving to death. They were emaciated and had terrible health. And so the researchers were saying, well, what are the common strategies amongst the kids that are doing well? They began interviewing these people, and they found that these families where the kids were healthier typically fed their children foods that were otherwise considered inappropriate. So like sweet potato greens and shrimp and crab, these were not common foods for kids. They had their kids wash their hands before they ate, and they tried to feed them, even though it was kind of this sloppy food, seemingly inappropriate for kids. They fed them 4 times a day instead of 2 big meals a day. And they started seeing the families that actually employed these interventions, their kids were far healthier than the people who were malnourished. This is an example of positive deviance. It's looking at what sets individuals within a similar population apart based on how they live. So let's now compare this positive deviance research to scurvy, and then to Parkinson's, and then to Alzheimer's disease. So the first one is, just like scurvy, we've known that Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease has been around now 200 years, and we don't fully understand the causes or mechanisms. But we do know that we can make neurodegenerative diseases better when people do certain things. When their diet changes and their daily routine changes and they exercise, we can change both the intensity of the bad symptoms and improve and amplify the positive aspects of their disease. So Dr. Lori Mishley took this and started doing studies, and she created an app that had her patients with Parkinson's disease rate their symptoms over time. How bad is your apathy and your tremors and your fatigue and your dystonia and your insomnia? And she took all of the real common symptoms of the disease and had people rate it, and then had them do certain things and measure their outcomes. Okay. So I want to share some of her observations. First of all, you have to understand the disease. And Dr. Mishley talked about the discrepancy between how physicians view Parkinson's and how patients view Parkinson's. When a doctor looks at a patient with Parkinson's, they're usually defining the disease by the motor symptoms. So they're looking for tremors and posture and dystonia, their face, shuffling gait, and so forth. But if you ask a patient about their perspective in Parkinson's, they seldom start with the physical tremors. They start with things like fatigue and the fact that I'm not motivated to do anything. I feel like crap. I can't write my name anymore. I have muscle pain and slowness. I have insomnia and I'm constipated. And you all have heard me talk many times that constipation is really the #1 predictor of Parkinson's many, many years before the motor symptoms start. Loneliness and depression are just rampant in people with Parkinson's disease. So the patient experience is quite different from the physician's experience. And in fact, Lori Mishley said, I don't even think we're measuring the same thing. So when you do a clinical trial and the clinical trial is focused on motor symptoms, and you're not even asking questions about the life experience of the patient, you're missing too much. And she goes on and says, when we ask all of our patients to rate Parkinson's disease, these are the symptoms they rate. Now look at that. 80 to 90% rate fatigue and handwriting and crappy sleep as the #1 symptoms, not tremors. not dystonia. And so I'm not going to read through all those, but you get the idea that Dr. Mishley is saying, hey, part of the reason maybe we haven't been able to make a big difference is when we do clinical trials, I think we're measuring the wrong things. We're hyper focused on making sure the motor symptoms get better. And if they don't get better, we say that an outcome doesn't work, a treatment doesn't work. But she's saying, listen, we need to understand the disease more from the perspective of the patient, and we might actually make their life significantly better. So compare this with your experience with Alzheimer's patients. We see patients with presumably Alzheimer's or different forms of dementia, and they range in age from 40s to 80s or 90s. Their major concerns differ. Their presentation of symptoms are completely different. Many of them have behaviors and psychiatric disorders, and others are as pleasant as the day is long. They just have some short-term memory loss. Some follow traditions. Some people have different financial capabilities, so they can do different things. Their educational levels and genetics and their labs all differ. And so it made me think I need to start looking at dementia from the perspective of the patient more than from my perspective of what I think may be happening. And so interviewing becomes so important. And I took that back as a real clinical insight and pearl. If you want to learn more about modifiable or symptoms, how to modify the variables and the symptoms of Parkinson's, you can read her study. And if you have Parkinson's, you could even enroll. I just wanted to throw her a bone and a shout out because I thought it was so helpful. This is probably my favorite slide of everything that she shared. And I want to talk you through this. She's rated people. All of those dots on the graph is someone that has Parkinson's disease and has participated in her Parkinson's disease symptom study. And you'll see that they all have Parkinson's disease definitively, but some are doing very poor, some are doing fair, some are doing really good, and some are doing excellent, right? She showed a video of a guy that has Parkinson's and he was competing in like American Ninja Warrior. He's had Parkinson's for 10 years, but it's basically halted and you can't even tell. But he had this major diagnosis, right? So this is when she got into the positive deviance research and said, now, why is it that amongst a population that has the same disease, so many do really well and so many do poorly? So she wants to identify why the ones are doing well and vice versa. And then she has the opportunity to give someone the choice about how to treat that. I created a little slide about Alzheimer's disease. This is all fictional data. So this is not a study that I have run. But I wanted to give you that same example. We have patients in our communities or in our care that don't do very well. Some are fair, some do good, some are excellent. Some people have these most remarkable changes and we think, wow, that was so awesome. How do we do that? So let's start considering the positive deviance in that population. Go ahead and hit your space bar 3 times. So what sets this group that's doing poorly apart? And what sets the group that's doing very well apart? And the question we should be asking ourselves is how do we shift the people who are doing poorly more towards the graph of people who are doing well? I hope our folks at Guardian Angel Homes and in Arizona and North Dakota and California and everywhere we have clients participating, I hope this thought's constantly in your mind as you coach with clients or you take care of a senior, that you ask yourself this question. Why is this person doing so poorly, or why are they doing well? And think about what you've learned and what you could add, because even small tweaks could go a long way. Go ahead and hit that space bar about 10 times. I want you to see the difference. So you could ask yourself these questions. Are they on pharmaceuticals? Do they drink soda pop? Do they Netflix and watch TV all the time? Do they consume alcohol? These are negative deviants. These would predict that people do poorly. But what about the people that do well? How are they sleeping? Are they doing brain training? Are they in ketosis? How have they changed their diet? Are they exercising? Hit your space bar a couple more times, right? Are they taking supplements? Do they drink soda? Keep going. You get the idea, okay? So we can think of the positive deviants that predict better outcomes in Alzheimer's or neurodegenerative disease, just like we can predict the bad outcomes. So the goal is if we can show our patients these graphs, we can tell them, hey, the choice is yours. You get to decide how this disease progresses. If you want it to progress very quickly, here's the things that you do. If you want it to progress slowly, you want to slow this sucker down, we know we have a lot of data now that shows how to do that. So in Parkinson's disease, this was her graphic of positive deviance. Exercise is so predictably important. And she showed individuals who only exercise twice a week showed no benefit. It was not a positive deviance. But individuals who exercise 3 times a week started showing benefit 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week. So in her research, she has shown it's not just the exercise that's important, but the amount of exercise that you do, the intensity of the exercise, the frequency, the duration, those things matter. Go ahead and hit your space bar 4 times. So we know the similar thing happens in Alzheimer's disease, right? Exercise is important, but we don't have good research. Do they only need to exercise twice a week or do they need to do it every day? I would argue, probably much like Parkinson's, that the more often they do it, the better they do. We know that in Parkinson's that people who have a good social life, people who cook their own food versus eating fast food or eating processed food that they just have to nuke, and people who actively engage in stress management. That means they go to a yoga class. They sit crisscross applesauce and close their eyes and do deep breathing for 10 minutes. When there is an active effort to participate in stress management, they do better. It's a positive deviant. Oh, I was so grateful to hear that because now I can apply that to the Parkinson's or for the Alzheimer's world. I think that crosses over. I think I've experienced that. She creates graphics and she says that the bigger the font and the bolder the font, the more it applies. So in the positive deviance in green, the more fresh fruit and fresh vegetables that a person does, the better their Parkinson's does over time. And she has shown in her research that the more diet soda that people drink, the more ice cream, the more beef. Get that? That's so interesting in Parkinson's. Canned fruit. She has done studies where they've looked at regular fruit and canned fruit. People who do canned fruit don't do as well. Canned vegetables, the same thing. And one of the questions that came up is it because it's aluminum? Is it because it's processed? Is it because there's a Teflon coating in an aluminum can when they can it? And she says, I have no idea. All I can tell you is the more canned food that people eat, the more poorly they do in Parkinson's. Oh my gosh, that was so interesting to hear her talk about that. I think there can be crossover with our clients. So this is kind of how she then graphs it on the graph. So she puts the positive deviance in the green and the negative deviance up high, and she draws her line through the middle. And then she'll tell her patients when she sees them, I'm not telling that you just have to eat fresh vegetables. I don't care what you eat. I'm just telling you, if you want to slow this disease down and you want to do better, here are all of the things that make a difference in people's lives. And now you have the choice about how you manage it. That's just another graphic that explains the same thing, that the more you embrace the positive deviance, it's not just the more that you sometimes people will latch onto one thing. They'll say, well, I eat a really healthy diet, but then they don't exercise much and they don't practice stress management. Other people take the nutritional supplements, but they don't sleep good at night. And her point is this. The more you take the positive deviants and apply them, and so there's more of them, that the sum of the parts tend to predict the best outcomes, right? So you can't just get away with eating a wheelbarrow full of vegetables every day and say, well, I'm doing my very best. That's all I can do. If you do that, you may not have as good outcomes. So I'm going to go back to our Lyme summary, and please think about this. For 200 years, Lymes were a recognized treatment of scurvy, and we had no idea what ascorbic acid was. It hadn't even been discovered. But she says, in our day and age, if you want to run a clinical trial, you have to discover ascorbic acid first, and then you have to prove to the National Institutes of Health that you have the causative agent in order to get the study. And she says it's totally backwards. What we're trying to do is look for the cause, and what we should be doing is saying, hey, what actually makes this disease better? We can't fix this with a medicine. Let's study what actually makes it better, and then our people's lives will get better, and it's less expensive. It's readily available today. We don't have to wait 20 years for it. It improves people's symptoms, and it improves their quality of life. I just left feeling so invigorated with how she approached Parkinson's, and I thought, wow, she's validating what we do. I believe that it applies to our rhythm too. She did a positive deviant test in nutraceuticals. So go ahead and hit your slide one more time. So she showed these are the top 20 supplements. Now, this is a little bit tricky. These are not necessarily the very best supplements, but these are supplements where there has been a positive deviance, and they're ranked in order. And since that's really small, I typed them up on the right-hand side of your screen. Interestingly enough, ginkgo was at the top of the list. And she says that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best. It just means that that more people were taking ginkgo, and then they ranked it as a positive benefit. So the reason that's at the very top is there's probably just more people who are using that particular supplement. And then look at the other variables as well. It's things like NAD. We've talked about NAD. MTHFR supplements. Oh my gosh, isn't that interesting? We're very big on managing MTHFR. Oral glutathione. Oh, I just smiled because you guys have heard me talk so much about glutathione challenges and trying to optimize that. The next one is Mucuna. Well, we don't use Mucuna a lot. It's a little bit more specific towards Parkinson's disease. CoQ10 is in the one, where we've used the one a lot. Low-dose lithium. Matt, I thought that you'd smile when you saw that. When I say low-dose lithium, I'm talking about 5 to 10 milligrams a day. Teeny tiny doses. Things in the psychiatric world, lithium, the smallest dose in a prescription medicine is 150 in an extended release. The average dosing in bipolar disease is usually it's 300 milligram tablets. And if you're starting someone who has acute bipolar, you're giving them usually 900 milligrams a day. Low dose lithium in doses of 10 milligrams a day is a positive deviant in Parkinson's. So interesting. Curcumin, glutathione, homocysteine factors, right? We have a whole section in Alzheimer's disease about trying to optimize homocysteine. The higher it is, the more aggressive we become. DHEA, resveratrol, there was just so much crossover, it made me smile. So another thing that she talked about, and I learned a lot about this. This is really fun. This is a take back or a clinical pearl I hope that all of you can appreciate. This clinical pearl is that it's well-defined foods and nutrients can have a drug interaction. What happens is individuals with Parkinson's take Sinemet. And we know that Sinemet, when it's absorbed in the body, its absorption goes down when it's taken with food. But something that Dr. Mishley talked about is it slows down when it's taken more specifically with a protein, okay? So she said you can completely ruin somebody's day if they wake up in the morning and they take their Sinemet, which is carbidopa, levodopa, and then they have eggs. And the reason is the next slide. If you look at this, it says this is from Pharmacy and Therapeutics. And in this journal, it shows that when we talk about the pharmacology of Parkinson's disease, we should have a focus on how food affects it. And if you read, I read this article, and this is the part I cut out of. This is almost word for word. The significance of this process is that levodopa competes with other amino acids like dietary proteins for transport into the brain, which may affect absorption. So to avoid this interaction, high protein meals should be kept separate from levodopa administration. So remember, our Parkinson's patients are the most active when they wake up in the morning through the early afternoon. That's where they're going to do most of their damage, right? So if you're giving them a higher protein meal at breakfast associated with taking their levodopa, it may not have any benefit whatsoever. So I'm a high protein guy. I just was thinking, oh my gosh, what do you do? Because another characteristic of Parkinson's is people are really thin. They lose weight. They get emaciated, right? They lose muscle. And so I'm always trying to say, well, how can I keep your muscle base up? So I asked that question and she says, let me explain to you what I do. And I put this on my next slide. She calls it a protein redistribution eating plan. So I used me as the example. I weigh 200 pounds. And if I take my weight and I divide it by 2.2, that gives you kilograms. So that means that in a day, I should eat about 90 grams of protein. If I had Parkinson's disease, let me show you how I would eat today. At breakfast, I'd have a bulletproof coffee or drink. If you don't drink coffee, you can have a bulletproof cacao or Creo brew. I could drink a protein drink. I could intermittently fast. If I wanted to have breakfast, I would eat oatmeal and fruit, but I would specifically not eat protein because when I take my carbidopa, levodopa, I do not want to compete with the dietary protein. At lunchtime, I'd have a nice salad, maybe with some berries and fruit, no protein. For my mid-afternoon snack, I'd have an avocado and a ketone drink, but no protein. Why? Because I want my motor function. Cinemet will help my cognitive function. Dopamine makes people happy, right? They'll just have better days. But when I'm going to sit down and eat dinner, I'm going to make up the balance that's due in my protein. So I'm going to eat a big steak, maybe have an egg with some spiced vegetables. And so you'll see this is when I'm going to load on my proteins. Why? Because after 6 o'clock at night, I'm winding down. I'm going to read a book or watch a Netflix and I'm going to go to bed. I don't need to be at the best of my game at 8 o'clock at night, but I need to be at the best of my game at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, wow, that was so insightful. That will help me as I'm teaching and training my Parkinson's patient how to incorporate the dietary recommendations of protein to preserve their muscle mass, but also to preserve their functioning when it's going to negatively compete with carbidopa, levodopa. So the timing of the protein at night maximizes the benefits of the Cinemet, and I'm not as concerned about that, so my quality of life goes up. If you take carbidopa, levodopa, we know that another positive deviant is that vitamin C increases absorption. Okay, so that's another thing. When I in the morning, I could add a little vitamin C, make my stomach more acidic, and that would help. So I'm going to end with this statement. I think there are so many things that we could do to make people's lives better. It doesn't matter if they have Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease or traumatic brain injuries. And sometimes our discussions with doctors are, well, that isn't going to work. That's not going to cure the disease. Why are you going to do that? And my opinion is that the doctor is not asking their patients questions to find out, are we making your symptoms better? Are you feeling better since we've been working together? In all reality, we're not working with the right doctors. We need to find physicians who are actually really interested in the growing body of research that shows there are positive deviants that make people's lives better if they have neurodegenerative disease. Go ahead and hit your space bar 5 times. So look at these. We want symptom improvement, quality of life, increased independence, cognitive stability. We want our seniors to maintain their ability to perform ADLs, and we want them to look us in the eye and say, I'm actually feeling better. That's what we're all about. That's what should happen. And I think sometimes we're stuck on, well, show me the randomized placebo-controlled double-blind trial that this is going to make a difference. And I always say, oh, give me a freaking break. We are going to improve people's lives through this. My friends, let's open it up for some discussion. Give me some constructive feedback here. What do you think?
I find it interesting with the similarities.
Yes, I did too. I thought it was so refreshing to sit and listen to her, because I thought, man, there's little Dr. Bredesons all across the country. And they're in these little pockets and they're making people's lives better. They're following research. They're genuinely interested in trying to move us forward in these complex neurodegenerative diseases. And I was just so pleased by it. So thanks for that comment, Gar. I agree with you. Any other comments? Any other thoughts that people have?
I really enjoyed it. A lot of great content. And Randy, I appreciated your observations about the low dose lithium. I've noticed over the years that there's now several over-the-counter supplements that contain lithium in low doses. And, I was kind of scratching my head over that, but it's interesting to look back on the history of lithium. When it was originally discovered, it was by a group of psychiatric patients back in the medieval ages of psychiatry. And this one group of clients, or this one area, the psychiatric patients that were dunking into a particular hot springs were having great relief. Well, they later learned that the hot springs was rich with lithium and they were absorbing low doses of it through their skin transdermally. But again, even for those clients, low dose really did make a difference. So it's interesting that low dose may help Parkinson's. I'd never heard of that before.
And Matt, lithium, when you talk about lithium, the discussion is a little bit of toxic. It's a little poisonous in the arena of cognitive health, because every single time in my primary care, when I have patients who's really struggling with mood, I've almost always said, why don't you pick up some low dose lithium at the store? Oh, heck no, I'm not taking lithium. My sister took that and it gave her kidney failure. La, 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 la. They go on. And I think, oh boy, you're thinking of prescription lithium at 900 to 1200 doses a day. And I'm talking about 10 milligrams, right? Teeny tiny doses. So it is interesting. There is a growing body of research that shows lithium has tremendous benefits, but I have found there is a bias against lithium because of how aggressive the psychiatric community has been with managing it for acute symptoms like bipolar disease. When you use low dose lithium, you don't have to check levels. Yeah. You don't have to worry about thyroid toxicity. You don't have to worry about hyponatremia or increasing sodium or kidney failure. It doesn't happen at those teeny tiny doses.
Yeah, and even at the doses that they would typically give somebody with bipolar 1, it's pretty easy to see if someone's getting toxic on lithium. You have to really be not paying attention to have that happen and not just fix it quickly. And typically, they'll start having tremors. That's the first sign. That just pull back your dose and then get some occasional blood work. I have a family member that was just having horrific mood swings, and her mom did not want her on lithium. And finally, her senior year of high school, her mom allowed her doctor to try her on lithium, and it was like a magic bullet. I mean, she was just symptom-free for years. So yeah, and lithium is a naturally occurring mineral that just occurs in the earth. I think it's probably underutilized in low doses.
Yes, I have a patient in my primary care practice that had Guillain-Barré in 2020. When he came back to Pocatello, he came back in a motorized wheelchair. He was a complete quad. Now he's walking, he's ambulatory, he's doing well. He's disabled. He hasn't been able to go back to work. But the mental illness in him, the depression has been overpowering. And if I invited him to come to a lunch and learn, if he would come, he would say this, that I noticed the most significant benefit in my mental health when I started using lithium, and I put him on 150 milligrams once a day. We did a prescription dose, but we did a teeny tiny dose. Most people wouldn't even consider it effective for bipolar disease, but we had tried so many things, pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical, and to this day, he gives me a hug and he tells me, lithium made #1 difference for me. I don't know why, but I agree with you. There's a part of me that has a very fond perspective of lithium. So.
Your insight, or the insight you shared about protein and cinnamon, like because I mean, in assisted living, you run into a lot of people with Parkinson's, and they take that medication, it's given to them in the morning, and then they come down and they have bacon and eggs. And then, they come down at lunch and they have meatloaf. And then they come down at supper time and they get their pork chop. And I mean, they've just been having that protein. And then we wonder why they're just, tremoring like crazy. It's like, well, man, so then they up the dosage. And it's like, wow, such a simple little fix.
Yes, Dr. Mishley said that. She said many of her clients come to her because they're saying, Lori, I've done the conventional thing for a long time and now nothing's working. I'm on the highest dose of carbidopa, levodopa, and there's just no benefits. And so I came to you looking for an integrative approach. And she'll ask them that question and they'll say exactly what you said, Scott. And she'll say, let's actually lower your dose and have you take it with no food or no protein. And she says, people will come back and say, oh my gosh, that was a game changer for me. And they came at it from the perspective that it was no longer serving them anymore. It was just that food to drug interaction. So I love that comment, Scott. That, Jennifer here, I think, wants to make a comment, and that would be interesting. Jennifer, that's something you could introduce to people. You don't have to say you can't eat protein, but you could just say, hey, new research is suggesting that if you didn't have protein when you took Sentiment, you might have better outcomes with that medicine. Let's stack your protein at night. Jen,
exactly.
what are your thoughts?
Well, and that's what I was going to say is how would you go about being able to even do that in a care setting, just because of the requirements that you have, state requirements that require you to have certain proteins at a meal. I mean, I'm just thinking like all these things. As soon as when I saw that part of the presentation, I was just like, oh my gosh, I mean, do we, would it be a doctor's order? Would it be, do I have to get a variance for diets from the state or something like that? But that's definitely something to talk to Whitney about and see how to incorporate that with the people that do take it. And maybe that would help. I mean, cognition alone.
Yes. I think that sometimes we think that dopamine is just for the motor symptoms. But remember, dopamine is the great feel-good drug of all time. That's why people who take Adderall really like Adderall, because it stimulates dopamine production in the brain, right? So maybe you ask a great question. That would require a little bit more follow-up, and I'm happy to participate with you if you need some of that medical or social support. Something that we could consider would be in patients that don't have the cognitive component, it's a choice. So it just becomes education. You still serve them the same meal that has protein on their plate, but maybe they choose not to eat that protein at breakfast. Or maybe they come and say, hey, I would like a big bowl of oatmeal, but I'm not going to have the eggs today. Those are a little bit easier because you're still offering them the full complement of the diet, but they choose what they eat. That's no different than when you and I go to a restaurant, we can order a meal and I don't have to eat anything if I don't want it. I can eat whatever I feel like, right? I think it becomes a little bit more complex in the seniors that can't make those choices, either because they're impaired enough or they just don't understand. So I don't know on those cases, I think it's individual. Maybe we talk with their doctor, we talk with their family, maybe we do a 1 meal trial or a 2 meal trial. And if you experience a couple of meals that are really helpful, sometimes, I mean, I've had patients before that can't really participate. And after we do one intervention and they get some clarity back, all of a sudden their level of participation goes up and they're more engaged in their care. So that's probably a work in progress, but it is something that's worthy of discussion with Whitney and your physician staff and so forth.
Yeah, Jennifer, I was thinking the same coming from that previous background. And I was like, hey, if you're living or your assisted living is the model where you have multiple choices for meals, then, if the person's cognitively aware and can be educated, they can choose another option. And that usually meets state requirements where there are choices being afforded residents. But in the memory care setting, or people who are like borderline on that cognitive, in the past, if a doctor ordered a special type of diet, we didn't do like mechanical soft and all those types of things. But if the doctor would say, this person needs to avoid this kind of food, or, whatever, as long as there was a medical opinion, we were able to kind of get around. I mean, the state has one big carte blanche rule. I mean, that's all they do, is they put it in place to assure that there's a quality food menu in place. But, there are people who need special diets, or they need to avoid something, or they need to have a sugar-free option or whatever. So you can usually work your way around that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah,
Excellent.
it's food for thought.
Yes, it is.
So Randy, a quick question. You mentioned that the issue with the Cinemed is that it competes may block the shuttling of amino acids or vice versa. So I guess the question is, does that go both ways? Taking the Cinemed and eating protein, would the Cinemed maybe be blocking your absorption of some of those amino acids at the same time the amino acids are competing for space and blocking the Cinemed? Because we do see this classic condition of people with Parkinson's just kind of wasting away and losing muscle mass. And I've always attributed that to the disease, but is that maybe malabsorption of protein? Because everyone's on Cinemed like 4 or 5 times a day.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. When I was at the lecture, I'm that guy that asked question and then just kept asking, because I said, hey, okay, so dietary proteins, is there a threshold? Is it a quantity amount? If I have 20 grams versus 10 grams, what about plant proteins versus animal proteins? What about protein drinks? And I was just asking. And she said, you know what? We think it's mostly animal proteins. And she said, I've experimented with some of my clients where we'll say, have beans, where beans have a little bit of protein in them. And she says, there didn't seem to be as significant a response, but it's not exclusively proteins. If you read the package insert, it's that it's best taken on an empty stomach. And so the researchers in the early days identified that its absorbability went down when there was food on the belly. And as time has gone on, I think there's a greater recognition that it's probably amino acid driven or protein driven. So you ask a great question, Matt. I'm not positive if it goes both ways and if that's one of the reasons that Parkinson's patients tend to be muscle wasting or not, because the phenotype is they're thin. Most Parkinson's patients are lean and mean, and they don't have a lot of muscle mass to them. That's kind of a characteristic of Parkinson's. So I became very enthralled with this because I'm always trying to help my Parkinson's patients gain weight, right? They just don't want to eat very much. They just aren't that hungry. And so, loaded question, great question. I think that as we coach clients, we can kind of take this knowledge to the table, have a conversation, and find out what would work for each one.
Yeah, maybe that staggered meal plan would actually help them maintain more strength and decrease falls.
Yeah, I had a patient the other day. It wasn't a Parkinson's patient, but we'd been brainstorming, how do we keep your fats up? We've been trying, how do we keep fats up? It's hard to try to eat really high fat. And you know what she does? She says that she opens a can of coconut milk. And as you know, coconut milk, when you open the can, is 50% solid and 50% liquid. And she takes that whole can and puts it in a plastic cup and freezes it with blueberries. And when she just scoops it out of the cup like it's ice cream, but it's really just coconut milk, which is really high in MCT, really high in fat. Great from the concept of Parkinsonism. And so I thought of my conversation with her in this same context with Parkinson's. That could be a really nice snack. High in fat, low in animal protein. I can try to beef up my client so they don't lose weight. I'm having a little bit of that high fat, maybe keto benefit. If I put some berries in it, I get all the benefits of the flavonoids in those berries. it made me think maybe there's things that we can do that are innovative and taste really good and help clients.
That does sound good.
Yeah, you're making me hungry.
Yeah, I want to
Yeah,
try.
we'll let you try it first, Randy.
Oh, I love coconut milk. Are you kidding me? At our house, we probably are eating 2 cans a week between when we make rice at our house. Instead of putting water, we use chicken stock. And if it's a 2-to-1, like 2 cups of fluid to 1 cup of rice, one of my cups is always a full can of coconut milk. So if I'm doing 2 cups of rice, I do 2 cups of rice, 3 cups of chicken stock, and 1 full can of coconut milk. That's how we do it at my house. We are coconut milk fanatics. So yeah, trust me, I'm doing that.
And it's so inexpensive.
It's cheaper than ice cream, that's for sure. Oh, that's great. Well, where are we at on time?
12:56.
Okay, we're probably at time to wrap up. But anyway, I hope this was helpful. I always try to think, what could I share that would lift our coaches and support and strengthen you with the clients that you're taking care of? So I'll keep trying to be thoughtful and bring good stuff to the table.